I'm Bob McCoskrie. Welcome to Straight Talk. This is our 9th episode. We're glad you could join us for the best hour of your week. And this is a home for social conservatives with no apologies. We especially welcome staff of the Disinformation Project who are obviously monitoring us. So good evening to you. Now, we are everywhere. You can watch us on our website, which is familyfirstnz. You can also watch on our YouTube channel. You can watch on our Facebook page. I'm just trying to go slow so the producer can keep up, Gordon. Or on my Facebook page, also on my LinkedIn page, and even on Twitter, familyfirstnz, because there's lots of twits on the panel. Everywhere you can watch us. If you're on Facebook and YouTube, you can share your comments to the panel and submit any questions you may have. Let's introduce the panel, and we have got a super sub in today for high impact, and that is Elliot Ikele. How are you, Elliot?
Yeah, good. Whakalawa to everyone out there. Really glad I could be here.
Now, you don't seem to be in your normal South Auckland home. Are you travelling around the country or something?
I am travelling around the country as we speak. I'm in a wonderful little motel.
Okay, you're not going to tell us where, eh? It's not like some real out in the wop-wops or anything like that. Okay, like Alfred, you have been down in Wellington all last week, and you're back home, are you?
No, still down in Wellington, and so yeah, down here. But you know, I'm keeping it real. I did try to make it aesthetically beautiful like Christine's. I try to make it more academic like Ashley's, and then I try to have a mixture of art, you know, and culture like Bruce. But I'm stuck in my daughter's spare bedroom.
Okay, right. And well, speaking of Bruce, how are you in Christchurch today?
We're all right. We're fine. We're still alive.
Okay, well done, Christine. Lovely to have you back. Because you weren't here last week. That's right. You had a big meeting, so we did miss you. So obviously the average IQ of the whole panel's gone up since your arrival tonight. How are you?
Absolutely. Well, hello, and it's lovely to be here.
Great. And finally, Ashley, how are you?
I'm good. I sat down a few days ago, Bob, and I watched the last couple of episodes of Straight Talk. At the time, I'll never get back. But I did notice that when I do my 90-second thing that I wriggle a lot when I'm presenting it. So I'm going to make a concerted effort today not to wriggle and to sit still.
Okay, you be as frigid as they come. Perfect. Okay. Our quote for today, everybody, and I thought it was very applicable, seeing we're talking about the budget. There is no such thing as government funded. It's all taxpayer funded. So I thought that was very applicable. The topics tonight, as I said, we're going to focus on Budget 2023, get the overall take from the panellists, but then a couple of specific questions I want to ask them. Should the taxpayer fund early childhood education for 2-year-olds? Should the taxpayer fund lunch and breakfast in schools? We might touch on the removal of the $5 surcharge on prescriptions. And if time, we'll take a look at the latest polling for who we might get as the next government. Now, I got some great feedback during the week. One bit of feedback we have got, panellists, is that some people really hate this sound. Some people love it, some people hate it. I know you guys have hated it until you got used to doing 90 seconds and then you actually didn't mind it. So just during, we're actually just going to take an online poll. Use it or lose it. If you are on Facebook or on YouTube, then could you just say use it or lose it? Do you want us to use it or lose it? And we will go by democracy because we are right into that. So this is your chance on social media. It needs to be Facebook or on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. Right, free speech moment. Let's get straight into it. And actually, we didn't discuss an order, so we're just going to wing it. Look, I've got Ashley down first because you gave me your topic first. And your topic is the real goal of the progressive agenda. So, Ashley, you have got 90 seconds starting now.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I talk a lot about the alt-left and the alt-right, two political extremes which are changing the face of the traditional political landscape. But whereas there hasn't been a truly alt-right government in several decades, there are a number of alt-left governments currently operating at national and state level around the world, including here in New Zealand, despite attempts to gloss over that inconvenient fact. Such governments reject traditional centre-left values, women's rights, workers' rights and the protection of children, in favour of an evil agenda which includes cancel culture, a direct attack on traditional rights of free speech under the euphemism of hate speech, the rewriting of history under the auspices of critical race theory, a sustained attack on traditional values, extreme moves to redefine gender, and the censorship of viewpoints which don't adhere to an approved narrative. Of course, they don't refer to themselves as alt-left. Instead, they describe themselves as progressive, and they use that term to imply that their particular views on the way that society should be run would lead to a veritable utopia, if only their views were applied fully and for long enough. But is that really true? While champions of the alt-left claim to be concerned about those whose society is traditionally sidelined, the methodology by which they try to achieve this is by imposing the will of the minority on the majority. They promote the preeminent role of the state in raising children, almost unlimited license around sexual activity and moves to remove the few remaining stigmas, the subservience of the individual to the state, community responsibility as a placebo for personal accountability, and a complete rejection of the idea of an agreed morality. The motivation of the alt-left isn't, therefore, just to have different viewpoints accepted and celebrated, but to force others to agree that there is only one viewpoint, theirs. That isn't inclusivity, it's tyranny, and rather than being progressive, it's regressive. It has no place in modern New Zealand society.
Well done, great finish, and my apologies. I thought I was going to press the button right when you finished, so I've probably done more damage to the vote than was really going to happen. That was a great wind-up, though. I'm glad we got the last sentence. To be honest, lose it is winning. Losing is winning at the moment, but I'm sure some more will speak up. Although, actually, there's a really good comment come through, which I really just have to show, and I'm not sure if it's got to do with the fact that it was you speaking, Ashley, but Dirk Jiggly says, "Hey everyone, great to tuck into some misinformed conservative propaganda. Keep up the great work." We are winding up
Dirk,
some people. Hey? Well, let's keep winding, and I might come to you, Elliot. And I wrote down. Oh, here's your topic. Your topic is National Party, Labour Light or ACT clone, I think it is. I have no idea where you're going with this, but your 90 seconds starts now.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you so much. Yeah, there's this humorous analogy or idea around there that National is Labour Light, that there's a bit of a litany of failures with Labour Party, and that National, some of their social liberalism actually moves them to the moderate to far left area of social liberalism itself. But I actually think that we've got a bit of a problem. The idea around National supposed to be way ahead in the polls, and yet they find themselves very much lackadaisical and very lethargic in the polling. And I do think that part of it has to do with the fact that they seem to simply be alongside ACT in terms of very similar policies. When you look at the mandates, the National Party very much about hitting beneficiaries if they chose not to get mandated, then punish them, same with David Seymour. The business mandating those, then they were always the same way as well, even down to the Wellington protest where people just want to stand up for their rights. Well, ACT and National were very much the same. Then you come to co-governance where there's a very much a extreme vagueness to both of those areas as to what that means. Will they keep Tupuna Maunga authority or will they keep them? ACT and National seem to be the same. Abortion very much so as well. So the question for conservatives and conservative Christians is exactly who do we place to be our voice and our advocates for conservatism in the future? Is it ACT? Is it National? Is it no one? Because no one in Parliament currently is a conservative party.
There we go. Very good. Some key questions there. All right, let's keep going. Christine, and you wanted to talk about leaving a legacy, and your 90 seconds starts now.
A few weeks ago, a young man lost his life in the Whangarei caves, which was an incredible tragedy. And soon after that, his friends explained what kind of a young man he was. And one of the comments made really hit me, and it must have been a 16 or 17-year-old boy, and he said, "Often I was starving and he fed me." And it really hit home to me again. You know, this is one of my passions. But to think that we're in this state, in this country, you know, most parents would starve to death before they let their children be hungry. But there are thousands and thousands in New Zealand who simply don't care. And we've got major problems. We should be very ashamed of where we stand in the world in terms of abuse. And I've said before, no one talks about it anymore. We're all woke. We pretend it doesn't happen. Well, it does. And the children that are doing ram raiding most of them are known to police from the age of 4 because of family violence. We need to have the courage to change this, and we need to do it soon. And if we have got the courage, we can change it, because this is the future of our country, and what a hideous legacy we are leaving.
There we go. You gave me 10 seconds extra. Thank you very much, Christine. Now, Alfred, you have decided to play the wild card because I know you've been very busy with the conference last week. So we will, in grace, give you that week off. So enjoy it. So that's me. And so, Bob, your 159 seconds starts now. According to the headline, 1 in 4 US teens identify as LGBTQ. Now, here's the breakdown of the 1 in 4. 5% are questioning, 4% are other. Just 3% are gay or lesbian, 2% said they didn't understand the question, and 12% said they were bisexual. Of course, they may also be aromantic, autosexual, bicurious, biromantic, demisexual, fluid, grey sexual, pansexual, polysexual or sapiosexual, and the list is growing every day. So many options for young people to be trendy, different, unique, and stand out from the crowd and gain minority group status. But when you dig deeper into the same data, you find that as the LGBT identity and gender confusion has increased, poor mental health has also increased. Substance abuse, poorer mental health, self-harm and sexual activity is higher amongst those identifying as LGBT, often significantly so. Now, advocates will immediately say, well, that's discrimination and phobia, despite the fact that it's now very cool to identify in this group, and there's whole months and days dedicated to celebrating it. But here's the question I think we need to ask. At the same time as rates of poor mental health for young people are increasing dramatically, more and more young people are thinking they can choose their gender. They're questioning whether they're a boy or a girl despite their biological parts. Which of the 112 genders are they? And they're also wondering which of the 200 plus sexualities they fall into. There's an obvious connection. Our kids are getting more and more stressed. It's time we spoke the truth about biology and about the biblical standard for sex for the sake of our young people. All right, and Bruce, last but not least, do you want to speak about the historically impoverished, virtue signalling, humorless, what's the last word? Progressives. That's a mouthful, and that it took 90 seconds just to say the title. But Bruce, your 90 seconds starts now.
I'm following on your footsteps, Ashley, about the historically impoverished, virtue signalling, humorless progressives with no redemptive sense of irony. Reminds me of Madame Defarge in Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. Awake to revenge and blind to compassion, she watches the heads roll off the guillotine in the hope of more. She sits outside her Paris wine shop, knitting into a scarf the names of those to be executed. Like Madame Defarge, the progressive knows the only way to paradise. Everyone must ride the same bus, and those who don't must lose their heads, cold-shouldered forever. Victims of an impoverished human vision, neither can really enjoy the revolution they would champion. Incensed by a deformed sense of justice, they can't understand that sacrifice is essential to human fulfillment and exaltation. Insisting on the immune self-righteousness of their vacuum-packed identity, the austere, virtue-signalling progressive makes forgiveness, that comforting lubricant oil of human lubrication, impossible. In identity paradise, there can be no reformed heroic drunkard like Sidney Carton from Tale of Two Cities, who can say, as he sacrifices himself for another, it is a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known. Those who inherit the self-creator's paradise can never experience nor appreciate the wisdom of sacrificial humility, because its creed is self-righteousness, its ambition the worship of self. Infatuated by the grotesque, it's a lie in love with death.
There we are, and that was especially dedicated to all those with an average IQ of more than 120, which counts all you panelists.
So no one here.
That was excellent, Bruce. And breaking news, it's a big lose it. So this is the last time you'll hear this sound on Straight Talk. And I just want you to know that I didn't actually choose it. It was Gordon, the producer, that chose it. So anyway, that's my excuse. Now, look, we did get a little bit of feedback. Leslie said, I was unable to listen live to last night's Straight Talk, so I started listening to the YouTube version. Bruce's free speech moment was brilliant. That was last week. Bruce, do you remember what you spoke on last week?
No.
No, I didn't think so. And I want to reiterate my question expressed in comments last week. Can we please have these little talks published somewhere so one can go back and digest them carefully? So if anyone knows a good publisher, maybe they can come to us on that. We also had this one. Absolutely loving the show. Your panellists are top notch, and I especially really appreciate Alfred in it. Hang on, didn't mean to read that one. Okay. And we did get one from Rosalind, and she's from Amana Christian School, and she was referring to the education curriculum that we were talking about last week. She said the idea of parents being the main educators came across, and this was good, but on the other hand, it must be mentioned that teachers are trained professionals, and it is unfair to say that the level of teaching is low. This, to me, dismisses many who are absolutely brilliant teachers. Many of us have high qualifications. But she says teachers are now being trained as a product of a system that has been failing for a number of years, certainly since Tomorrow's Schools and the demise of school inspectors. The philosophies of learning that were introduced, such as the discovery method, child-directed learning, play, little or no structure in the program, etc. I think one of the greatest barriers to children learning is the present-day attitude of entitlement. Why should I learn if I don't want to? And I have failed that test. You, the teacher school, are to blame, not me. Students see no reason to learn anything off by heart. After all, there is at their fingertips when they go online. And of course, this takes discipline, and we all know that is a dirty word. And she points out that there's a number of Christian schools doing a great job. Some are private and some offer distance learning. So that was feedback from Rosalind. I'm sure, Bruce, you agree with everything that Rosalind was saying in that letter there. Yeah. Okay, right, let's get straight into it, folks, and we are going to talk about the budget tonight. And for the panellists, I basically want to find out what you liked about the budget and what you didn't like. So, Bruce, you actually have to give us something that you liked on this particular... I think, Christine, also, you had struggle when we did a like-dislike last time, so you have to as well. There was one kind of standout thing that came up in the budget where a lot of money was poured into it, and it was this.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the first 5 years of a child's life are extremely important for development and learning. We also know that right now the cost of access to early childhood education and childcare can be a barrier for parents and caregivers wanting to enter or remain in employment, education or training. Parents should not have to forego ECE for their children because of the cost. Budget 2023 responds to this by investing $1.8 billion in early childhood education. Mr. Speaker, the flagship of this package is extending the 20 hours support to include 2-year-olds, adding to the existing 3 to 5-year-olds.
Okay, so that was one of the big ticket items. Let's just have a look at all of the big ticket items. And there was infrastructure resilience, which is response to the Cyclone Gabriel and other events like that, $6 billion. Public housing, $3 billion. Disability and health support. Disability gets $860 million, $1 billion for health to help hire 500 extra nurses. Not sure where we're going to find those. And then remember, this is over 4 years. Early childhood education, $1.5 billion. That's extending the eligibility to 2 years old. Railways, $959 million, which includes the City Rail link. Cutting prescription costs, the $5 surcharge, $619 million. That's $170 million per year. Smarter, warmer homes, $402 million for 1,000 homes. We've got the free buses and the cheap buses. We've got $323 million to continue free lunches in some schools. We'll come back to that one. And Alfred, you might want to comment on this one. We've got an $825 million package for Māori, which is fair enough, but only $51 million going towards Pacific initiatives. Now, just before I bring in the panel, I guess the key question is, where does the money go? And for our people watching, you'll be interested to know sort of the background of where your tax money goes, because remember, nothing is government funded, it's funded by you. And Henry Cook is a ex-political reporter. He's taking a break, and he produced this summary of where the average annual income tax payment goes. So it's not including GST and company tax. And it goes on, I think I have it here. That's where it goes. Social security and welfare. Health is a biggie. Education, economic and industrial services, core government services, law and order. But you'll see that big one up the top, social security and welfare, What's that made up of? It's superannuation. So we're basically funding Bruce. Bruce is taking up all the money that most of the budget is going towards, and this single benefit costs more than every other area of government spending other than health and education. You'll note also that there was some money for the wage subsidy. There's also job seeker support, so this is to deal with the housing crisis, the accommodation assistance and income related rents, which make up a big amount. And Treasury released this graph on inflation. So let me show you that. Over the last year, inflation prices have gone up 6.7% according to Stats NZ. So that basically means you're spending 6.7% more on each transaction you make. But have a look at this animation. It shows the CPI figures for the budget since 2018, and the solid line on the left shows the actual inflation recorded, and the dashes are the forecast from the government budget, and you'll notice that big shift up until 2023. And so that is not very encouraging. Now, just before I go to the panel, there was one hilarious moment when the Finance Minister said that the budget was going to take a gendered approach for the benefit of women. And partly because women have babies. Have a listen.
Speaker, it is worth noting our wellbeing budget approach applies a gender budgeting lens into Budget 2023, expanding on last year's pilot program. This year it looked at 27 initiatives across 15 agencies. And this lens has influenced the range of investments, including in the cost of living space, and has been an important and useful indicator of whether the budget is meeting our wellbeing objectives. For example, we know that on average, women have lower KiwiSaver balances and retirement income than men. Time out of the workforce for parenting responsibilities is one key reason for this.
Yes, women get pregnant. So we actually wanted to ask Chris Hipkins what is a woman, seeing it's part of the budget, but he's still working on the answer. Now, just before I go around panel and ask you for what are your highlights and your lowlights of the budget, let's just have a quick listen to the responses of Nationals Christopher Luxon and ACT's David Seymour, because they actually make a couple of good points.
From this government, we've just got a culture of excuses and we've got a culture of addiction to spending. 1.8 billion on consultants. Yet Chris Hipkins told them don't spend on consultants, but they kept doing it anyway. $200 million on a failed polytechnic merger. 80% of the staff want to leave. 10% less enrolments and looking for more money with more deficits. $100 million on government advertising. $500 million for very big companies on climate subsidies. Almost $500 million on a health bureaucracy that should be going to the front line. $50 million on that bike bridge. That was special, wasn't it? Wasn't that just special? The bike bridge was very special. $16 million got spent by Willie on the RNZ-TVNZ merger. And we all know how that ended. And we've got 200 comms staff now at Health New Zealand and more at the ministry. Frankly, I'd sooner have more nurses. I'd sooner have 200 nurses, not 200 comms staff. And we've got a 10-fold increase of comms staff at Michael Wood's NZTA. And then we've got the beauty, the $30 billion on light rail that just keeps sitting out there, coming one day.
These are the one thing that Grant Robertson has more than anything of. He's got even more excuses than he's got deficit dollars to spend. You see, Mr. Speaker, Grant Robertson blamed COVID. Well, I'm sorry, it's officially over. The world moved on over a year ago now. And then he blamed Vladimir Putin. And I can understand that as a political tactic because he's an extremely bad man. But the facts are the oil price is now lower than it was before Putin started his war. So that excuse is gone. And then, perhaps most shamefully, he tried to use the victims of the floods and cyclones as an excuse for his endless addiction to spending other people's money. Well, I'm sorry, but in this budget, there's $7 billion of borrowing and only $1 billion of extra spending for the cyclone and the floods. In fact, not even that, about $900 million of new spending to help people who in many cases have lost everything and still have no certainty about what that rebuild will look like. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a government that's running out of other people's money, it's running out of excuses.
All right, let's go around the panel and we want to find out, well, let's start with the highlights, so let's be nice. And what were the highlights of the budget from last week? Where do you think it strengthens families, strengthens the country? gives a bit of hope. Ashley, would you like to kick us off? What were the highlights?
Yeah, so the highlights for me were, to be fair, it was, I mean, as an act of political theatre, it was masterful, because people that don't think about the consequences of the spending actually will look at this and think it's probably not a bad budget. And the spending itself, the stuff that they actually spent money on, again, to be fair, is classic Labor spending. It's not unusual for a Labor government to be putting money into the sorts of areas that were in this budget. But there's some really scary stuff. Do you want to talk about the negatives now, or do you want to come back to those later?
We'll come back. Was that 3 highlights? Did I get 2 or 3? I think
that was
2 or 3.
That was 2, and I choked as I said them. But it was
okay. Christine, we'll come to you. What were your highlights of the budget?
Well, look, you know that I struggled with the highlights. In fact, I didn't write any down, but if I'm being really generous, I could say the victims of the floods and the storms, yes, the spending on that's appropriate and probably not enough, nowhere near enough. And I support infrastructure spending, but beyond that, I think it's a disaster for the future and for the country presently.
Okay. Elliot, what were your highlights?
Yeah, I like the 77 million for the apprenticeships. I think that we definitely do need our trades and apprenticeships up them. I know quite a few of those guys. They're really good. I also do, not including the railway projects, I do like the idea of infrastructure being looked after. And I think the floods have shown both the positives and negatives of both the setup and the not so set up infrastructure points.
Okay. Alfred, you've written a few budgets in your time. What were the highlights of this one?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say that the reasons why people voted against your buzzer, it sounded like a Liverpool supporter in 2023. It started with a triumphant sound, and then ended up, because the games got worse, like the sound of
mute Alfred
flatulence, of despair. Anyway, look, I mean, everyone's talking about infrastructure, and everyone knows that's how important it is, because everyone complains about potholes on the road. We have to remember that everything is a motive in the public square, and people are looking for things that matter. So I agree with Ashley that they've tipped onto things like, for instance, early childhood education. We'll talk a bit more about how we feel about that a bit later on, but you know, they've tried to talk about transport. They've tried to sort of talk about things like, for instance, removing the surcharge around prescriptions. But probably like everyone else, the thing that we need to remind ourselves, so you see the big ticket dollar items, but the truth is, don't forget they're spread over 3 to 4 years, right? Now you start to break that down. You have to actually do some of the analysis behind, then what does that spend actually mean? And where are they actually spending it on? Then the other question you have to ask is, if you look back over this previous budget, and don't forget 2021, they announced the big wellbeing budget they trumpeted. But actually, if you look along that progression year in and year out, have they achieved the outcomes that they're destined to? No, they haven't. Many times over, you and I can talk about the housing, education, health. I mean, they just continue to stack up like a pancake, right? And then they pour over the golden syrup and just make you feel like it's going to get better one day. But the truth is, it doesn't. And I'm concerned that the fact is that when you look at the polling, some people still think this could be a good budget, this could still help us. And they've tried a last thing. They want to key into what Jacinda spent all of that sort of communications budget and advertising. Is it kind and is it caring? That's the two key words they're using.
Okay. Was that a highlight or a lowlight you were talking about, Alfred?
Well, I'm like Ashley. It's like a what you call a fried rice. It's a fusion fried rice of all sorts of. It's got chicken, it's got prawns, it's got the whole lot. Just enjoy it.
Okay. Before we go on to lowlights, Bruce, what were your highlights of the budget?
Well, very brief, my highlights, but I was quite happy with the apprentice money for the apprenticeships, because apprenticeships have been a problem for a very long time, and it's been for a very long time, for 30 or 40 years now. So I don't know how far that money is going to go, but let's hope it goes some distance. I also am a bit of a fan of railways, and I was pleased to see money go to railways, which seemed to be an increase. I'm not sure how that's going to actually spin out, but that looked okay to me. But that's about it, as far as I can see, as far as things that I found worthy of some praise.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. My highlight was the disability funding. although unfortunately involves setting up a Ministry of Disabilities, and as we know, anything that is spent on government departments is a waste of money. So, but I still think focusing on disabilities is important. Right, I can tell I need to let you guys off the leash because you're just dying to talk about the lowlights. Ashley, do you want to kick us off? What were the lowlights?
Yeah, well, so we're in a period of high inflation, 6.7%, as you said before. It was previously 7.2. The impact of that on the household of Kiwis is really, really painful at the moment. It means mortgage interest rates are much higher than they need to be. It means the cost of food and household essentials is way up. And what governments do during that period is they have austerity budgets, which means that they look at what they can do to cut back on their spending, because as the biggest spender in the economy, governments have the biggest ability to actually influence the cost of living coming down. So let's compare that to what these guys have done. Let me give you some numbers. The first thing is that the deficit is the difference between how much they bring in tax and income and how much they actually spend, has increased from 500 million in the previous year to 7.6 billion for this year. That is a massive, massive increase. The second one, the operating spending has blown out from 61 billion when they came into office to 137 billion per year. That is terrifying for anybody who understands economics. And the third one, the result of all that, is that debt's blown out to $95 billion by 2026. Now, there would be people cheering, saying, isn't it fantastic they're spending more money? The impact of that on the long term of our economy and on people growing up now and going into the workforce is going to be disastrous. It's a terrible, terrible, frightening budget in terms of what it means for the economy.
Okay, and just before we move away from your expertise, can we blame COVID?
No, there was a moment in time where COVID impacted, but most responsible government would have readjusted its spending priorities to fund what it did during COVID. These guys didn't. They just went and borrowed and printed money.
Okay. Christine, your lowlights?
Well, to me, it was a disaster. It's absolutely inflationary. And I think it's, we should have targeted. Some of those things are not bad things per se, but they should be targeted. And instead of that, they're being given to everyone, which is absolutely ludicrous as far as I'm concerned. And it didn't hit where it needed to. Families are struggling to pay for the most basic things, and the only thing that would have really relieved that was some kind of tax adjustment, and that didn't happen in the way that it should have happened. To me, the whole thing is just, do they have no depth of thinking? And I know that they don't. They talk about being addicted to spending. I think that's absolutely true. The answer to everything with this government is just spend more, spend more, spend more. And apparently they have 6 billion more that they have found for election promises or bribes. 6 billion more.
Okay. Elliot?
Yeah, so David had a good discussion on the inflation area. I think I'd have a look at the social fabric elements, and I think that one of the most horrific ones is the idea of bringing the more ECE down to 2 years old. I think that's quite obscene. I think you're basically taking the children out of the arms of parents, and I wouldn't say coercing, but nearly coercing them to go back into the workforce and leaving children with state-approved caregivers, which I think is horribly wrong. I would definitely like to see it more be returned back to the families who decide to have their children at home. I think that's the proper way. Also, I would say that the lunches, all those millions of dollars being sent into lunches...
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt you, Elliot, because you're speaking about a couple of things we're going to dig deeper into. So I will come back to you and I'll kick off with you, because what you're saying is very important. So hold that, caller, standby caller. Alfred, what do you reckon?
Well, the thing is that when you look at that picture about where the actual spend is and where the appropriations are in particular, it's heavily weighted in the social sector. Now you've got to take superannuation, and that's a universal fund that we have, and we won't be able to change that anytime soon. Though people have talked about, do we raise the age of superannuation because of the cost factor, whether we can afford it or not. But the concern for me is that this is the government that's actually starting to push the ideas and the narrative around the UBI, Universal Basic Income. Somehow they're creating greater dependency, and that's the greatest concern that I have. And at the moment, the reasons why people will keep supporting them, if you notice, we've got an increase in number of people that are now on welfare dependency, So they don't feel the aspect of inflation as much as others do, right? The CPI is not something that most of them will know about because a lot of their costs is factored into accommodation allowances and so forth. So that's where my greatest concern is. And when you think about what they're trying to do, especially with Māori and Pacifica communities in particular, and you made mention about that, Bob, about, we've got $825 million in this current budget that's going to Māori, and then you've got $51 million that's going to Pacifica. Well, I mean, it's interesting because the question you have to ask yourself is not so much the dollar amounts, but what are they doing and what are they achieving with that? And again, if you go back over the annual reports, have a look at what the appropriations are. And again, it's all the big talk about the big well-being budget. This is what they can achieve, X amount of houses, people into education and employment and so forth. But if I take, for instance, for Māori and Pacifica, what we haven't done is increase the number of those going into SMEs, small to medium enterprises. So we're keeping a certain cohort of our communities locked in a dependency cycle. We're not getting them into a place where they can generate their own forms of fund and independence. And it's the feature of this budget from what I call a socialist come communist type government that I believe has got of greatest concern to me and a number of other people in our community.
Okay. Bruce, any lowlights?
Well, I don't think I can do much better than Alfred. That was very good. Although I'll add a couple of little things. Alfred, in 1831, there was a commentator on the American Republic, Alexis de Tocqueville, a very interesting character. And he said that the American Republic will endure until the day Congress discovers that it can bribe the public with the public's money. And that, unfortunately, is exactly what's happening. And along with that, and I have a serious reserve about budgets generally, not just this one, although certainly this one in particular, because it allows governments to get bigger and bigger. And that fuels the expansion of more and more borrowed money rather than disciplining themselves to operate on the basis of the taxes they raised. And that panders to unrealistic demands from the voters for more and more spending, which is exactly what you're talking about. And it seems to me to be a very serious problem.
Okay, let's get into a topic that Elliot is very excited to get into because he's identified two of the key family issues that was in the budget. The first one is expanding ECE to include 2 years old, and it comes at a cost of $1.2 billion over 4 years, introduced not till next year though. Currently it's available to 3 to 5 years. Now, the interpretation is that this will benefit about 37,000 families in New Zealand. Now, we have done previous commentary on this, and what we argued, or the stats we presented, was that some babies and toddlers are spending more time in daycare than primary age children are expected to spend at school when they first start. So there's been a big growth in 1s and 2s since 2000. 1-year-olds have almost doubled, increase in babies. But it's the length of time that's the most concerning. Between 15 and 20% of babies, 1s, 2s and 3s, are in daycare more than 30 hours a week, and sometimes longer than a 40-hour working week, and that's increasing for each age bracket. So blue is babies, orange is 1s, greys is 2. And then this is 1-year-olds. Around 7 to 8% of 1-year-olds are in daycare more than 42 hours. That's the grey block. And here's the figure for our babies, under 1, grey box. Fortunately, it has decreased, but it's still somewhere between 5 to 10%. So our argument was that there's a growing evidence of profound beneficial neurobiological effects a mother's physical presence has on her young child that can't be achieved by anyone else, including paid childcare workers. And our argument was, and Brainwave Trust have made the same argument. We were trying to think of their name couple of weeks ago, Christine, weren't we? Mothers and parents in general have been undervalued, and many parents use daycare because they simply can't afford not to. And are our babies and toddlers being used in a big social experiment that nobody wants to talk about? So, Elliot, you were first off the block, and you are talking about what? Parental family choice, more choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I find it very despicable how Labour Party should be so far away from any type of policy dealing with children. From even before they're born, Labour has become an incredible existential threat to a child's life, let alone livelihood. The pushing for children as young as 2 years old now to be pushed even further into state-approved caregivers, I think is such of dramatic effect that we've already seen some of the negative effects within our 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old children. We're spending a lot of time in the kindergartens, and now, of course, they've come into their schools with their own behavioural needs, RTLB and ORS especially. I find it quite disgraceful that they are pushing this as a positive, and it reminds me of the whole narrative around some of the most negative aspects around family. Family must look after family. It is the greatest form. The greatest place for a young child to be raised up is in the arms of his or her mother. There is nothing else beyond that. And if you're not going to, I would love to see the policy where it says that, you know what, instead of making it 20 hours ECE free, we're going to give you that tax break back, so that if you can stay at home and look after your child, then you'll get that money's back in terms of tax credits. I'd love to see that instead. That would be much better.
Alfred, is that a problem? Because that's hinting about a universal benefit, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think the thing is that I take the point that Elliot's making, and look, the Brainwave Trust was pushing this whole thing around the first 1,000 days, and Christine will know about that. And all the research shows the importance of the bonding of mothers with their children is significant. Look, we used to run an ECE as part of a church that we were pastoring and looking after. It was a kindergarten. It was sessional. So we understand that the role that can play for parents and for mothers. But in the end, we had to close it down. And the reason we closed it down is because the demand was now growing for parents wanting to drop their kids off as early as 6 a.m. in the morning and pick them up as late as 6 p.m. And, it's a real concern. So in the end, we couldn't meet that. That's not what we believed, that we needed to focus the kindergarten. We had to close that. So we're living in a consumer world now where our values have changed about what we think and what we value as being really important. And so we've substituted the fact is that now there's a cost factor to having children. How much does it cost to send a child to school? Now we're looking at the cost. And I've heard parents say to me, oh, it's too expensive to have a child. I want to wait till I've got enough money in the bank so that I can do what I need to do. Well, many of us here, because we're old enough, remember the days that when we got raised, I mean, the curtains were sheets over the windows, right? There were sort of tea boxes and things that we did just to get by. And we lived and we were raised in a time when the value of the family was more important than anything else. And I think that's important, that if we start to substitute some of that, and I spoke just yesterday to an early childhood, very experienced teacher and leader, and she said, look, quietly, there's a number of us that are saying, we don't agree with this policy. This whole thing around getting younger and earlier, it's just not going to be good in the long term for our children. And so I would agree. I think it's important that we need to have enough that's there that gives some respite for mums as well. But at the same time too, let's encourage mums to enjoy what it means to nurture your child, especially in those first 1,000 days.
Okay, Christine, you and I have worked a lot in this particular area. To be fair, some children are better off at kindy or daycare than they are at home, aren't they?
Yeah, unfortunately that is true. And look, I think it's important that people have choice, and that's why I talked before about targeting it in a different way, and the only way I can think of to do that is through the tax system. But I do also want to make a point that'll be very, very unpopular, I'm sure. When I was having my children, it was a long, long time ago, I never thought about the state having to contribute to them being looked after, or me staying home to look after them in terms of paid maternity leave. And I'm not saying, I mean, that's the way the world's moved, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't be there. I just think there is now an attitude that the government is going to pick up the tab for us raising our children. And how did we get to this place where it's not our responsibility? And I do know that life is really tough out there, and that parents are under incredible pressure just to be able to afford some very basic things. But when did that turning point happen where we think it's the state's business to be involved in any of this?
Yeah, and I mean, that was an interesting thing. We, Family First, promoted increasing paid parental leave and even some paid paternal leave for dads to support the mums, especially during those first couple of really crucial weeks. And one of the arguments was, why should the government fund it? Our argument was simply, look, if we're funding to the tune of 1.8 billion for professional child carers to look after children, why don't we also acknowledge the role of mums and dads who make financial sacrifices to raise their own kids? Why are they left out of the picture? Bruce, what do you think in this area? Should we be funding ECE?
Well, it's a complex issue, but what worries me about it is that the Labor Party's psyche seems to be unable or unwilling to consider the role that the family plays in society. They undermine the importance of the family by assuming that it's a good thing to have little children in care and that they should be financed to be in care. That suggests a kind of thinking that thinks that men and women should be operating in the workplace in the same kind of way, which is an ideology which I don't think works, and it is not a good thing, but nevertheless, that's the kind of driving ideology that's shaping the way we're going. And it's hard to break away from that because we've bought into it almost as a society. And it seems to me unfair that people, parents who have children home in a kindergarten or a childcare centre, get the money that they get to do that. But those people who have children at home are penalised because having children at home doesn't seem to be valued. And it just worries me that a culture that doesn't value family life and the life of children is on the way down rather than on the way up.
Okay, Ashley?
I'm really conflicted by this, and particularly conflicted because of Christine's comments, which have really given me cause to have a good think about what I'm about to say, but I'll still say it. And I absolutely take on board Elliot's comments. I agree that in a perfect society, in an ideal world, we would have, mum or dad at home looking after the kids. But the issue we've got is that this is not about parents making a choice between being at home with their kids or putting them in ECEs. It's an issue of economic necessity. I employ quite a large number of people across various enterprises, a lot of young mums who have their kids, and that first couple of years and a little bit longer before the ECE subsidies kick in, it's not a case of them being at home during those years. It's a case of mum and dad, or in some cases just a single parent family, having to pick up that cost themselves. So they are waiting to get to that point where there's some subsidy so that can actually be picked up by the state. And this is going to assist those people. Having said that, take Christine's point entirely. When did we change? When did our society change from one that said, hey, that should be our responsibility to the responsibility of the state? So when I say I'm conflicted, that's why.
Okay, let's just, before we move on to the next topic, which is another one that Elliot flagged, I would just want to highlight the upcoming conference, the Forum on the Family. I saw in the media that there was yet another story about a biological male identifying as a woman who was competing in the women's sports, and people were talking about the unfairness of it, and that's actually one of the speakers that we have at the forum. Let's meet her.
Hi, I'm Deborah Ackerson, and I'm a 2-time Olympian and a 5-time Commonwealth Games medalist in weightlifting. I've competed for Australia for 20 years, and I'm really looking forward to speaking at Forum on the Family at the end of June. And I'm mainly speaking on this topic because I have been personally affected by the issue of transgender athletes in sport. I found myself competing in my last Commonwealth Games against a transgender athlete, a biological male from New Zealand. So I really want to talk about fairness in sport, how it's affected me and how it's going to affect many more people.
Hey everybody, it's Lila Rose with Live Action, and I'm so excited to get to speak to you at Forum on the Family coming up in June. We're going to talk about the importance of fighting for life, whether it's in New Zealand or here in the United States, and how together, if we are convicted and passionate and willing to stand up for the truth and stand up for the preborn child and their parents, we can change our countries and our culture. Excited to see you there.
Okay, and that is coming up on the 30th of June, and there's also a gala dinner on the 29th with the ex-Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, John Anderson, and that is going to be a great discussion. So register forumonthefamily.nz. Right, Elliot alluded to the fact that there was another issue in the budget that we wanted to talk about, and that was funding food in schools. $323 million to keep free lunches in some schools. In fact, there's a healthy group coalition that wanted actually to reach half of New Zealand's school children. The issue is that, in fact, according to the most recent New Zealand Health Survey, about 12.5% of children live in households in which food runs out sometimes or often. Now, 12.5% is 100,000 of our 815,000 school kids. And I actually read an interesting article in the Herald where they talked about the fact that there was actually, the reason the cost is climbing is because the schools that join the scheme must offer it universally to all students. Everyone gets a free lunch or nobody does because of the possible stigma, and about 35 schools have actually rejected the school funding because they want to target the funding to the kids in need rather than just right across the board. So let's go around the panel. Do you agree that we should continue funding to this extent food and breakfast in schools? And we'll start with the pastoral heart. Christine, what do you think?
Absolutely not. I think it needs to be targeted. This is just a ridiculous waste of money. You know, apparently there is so much left over because kids are now saying they don't like it. They don't like what's there. And some of them have got their own lunches. A lot of them have got their own lunches from home. I think that is just absolutely ridiculous. It's not helping anyone at all. And, you know, when the programs first started, they were having kitchens at school and gardens. They were showing those kids how to grow that garden, how to harvest it, and how to cook. I saw it happen, particularly in South Auckland, over and over and over again. That's the core of it. It's about giving them the skills and the ability for their future life. It's not just about turning up with that food. The whole scheme is well-meaning but stupid.
Okay. Ashley, do you agree with Christine on this one?
Sort of. So two separate questions for me. On the one hand, is it the responsibility of the state to feed kids that don't have food at home? Probably not. Is the school the right mechanism to do that? Probably not. On the other side of the debate, if kids aren't eating, I do think somewhere along the line there's a responsibility to make that happen, whether it's through the schools, whether it's through the mechanism. Certainly not universalism. I agree with Christine that targeting is the correct approach. But whether you know, right now this is the option that's on the table. We've got kids that aren't eating. We've got a high inflationary environment and parents that can't put food on the table. I would be saying, look, let's do this right now and look for a better solution.
Okay, I mean, one example is Yandara School, which is in Otara, and the principal said she declined the initiative to protect community mana and self-sufficiency, which was interesting. It did fascinate the media. Alfred, what's your thoughts on this one?
Oh, look, I totally agree. I think this is just, again, another form of, you know, socialism that tries to feed into, and it disguises itself in this facade of saying, look, there are kids that are hungry, we've got to feed them, it's the best thing we do. Hang on, take one step back, ask the first question, the most important one, why are our kids going hungry? And then how about we ask the question together as a community, as a school, with the parents, and let's find the ability to meet the need immediately, right? Because there could be some issues, as Ashley said, which is important, but that's not the long-term solution here. And I agree with you know, the school in Otara, because what we've got is that we've got Chardonnay socialists that are going out there basically saying, let's go and help the poor brown kids, right? And that's what it is. It makes them feel good. They pat themselves on the back and they go, yeah, we went out to Otara and, you know, we went out to Elliot's whānau and family and so forth. And it makes them feel good. But the truth is, it hasn't respected the mana and dignity, because I can tell you this, there are parents who are working class parents who do incredibly hard work really hard and do provide for their kids. And what happens is that nanny state comes along and say, hey, why don't we help you? Why don't we do it with you, right? And it all starts off nice and caring, kinding, right? basically you're just dropping frogs into pots, right, all the way around the country, and you just keep turning up the heat all the time. And before we know, we're all cooked. We've lost our values. We've lost the things that are really important. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a universal program, a button, you just push it. And I think more schools, they need to stand up, more of our communities, and say that we don't need the help of people who are trying to turn around and do this for us. Ask them for the same key of opportunity, unlock the doors, create local solutions that help parents take responsibility along with schools and the wider community. That's got to be the best answer for us.
Okay, Elliot, what about the argument, though, that, look, why should a child go hungry? Why should they be punished because their parents are useless? And neglectful and just can't be bothered making lunch?
Yeah, so I'll come from it from a pastoral point of view. I was part of the pastoral teams for several schools, and when I needed to know which children were going hungry, and we're not idiots. We know full well who's going hungry. We can find out from behavioural issues and then reach back to where that occurred. At that point, I would be going door knocking. Now, I'll be going straight to the families, or at least the homes where they lived, and I'll be finding out, okay, why hungry, where hungry, what's going on? Is it laziness on behalf of the parent? Is there something going on? What this free lunches for all does is it covers real issues under the rug, and it clouds the ability for those who are in pastoral roles to find out what's happening underneath the surface. Is it because there's a disease going on? I've found out one child had their father die, no one had advised the school, and so then we suddenly had this issue where the father had gone, the mother had just shut down, and that's where they were getting that food. Now, if the boy and the girl were getting free lunches, we would have missed a lot of that until it had come to a massive head. That's just one example. I have to tautoko exactly what Alfred is saying. This idea that poor, and let's say it, poor brown kids need to have these benevolent white people come along and give them free food is so disgraceful. It's unbelievable. And let me tell you, the parents and the families are very keenly aware of that underlying issue that removes their mana, removes their very dignity of being families. A lot of our parents are struggling. Good. It makes us feel good to know that we're struggling to put food in the bellies of our children. We don't need, and I'm sorry to say this, but Chardonnay socialists, mostly white liberals, coming along and using brown people for themselves to look better. It is disgusting, and it brings our people down, and it weakens us further and further.
Okay, just before I come to you, Bruce, Tan says, free lunches at schools have made a huge positive impact at schools in my community. They're engaging better in their learning, getting to try and learn different foods and how they're good for their bodies, and there is a less negative energy running around. It's fantastic. And Lynn says, Palmerston North have a free food store. There is no reason any children should be hungry. There is enough food to go around. It's political interference with finances makes it too easy to afford the basics. Bruce, what's your thoughts?
Well, it's a centralising problem again. I think that last comment about the preschool store, the more action that goes on between the parent and the school would seem to me much more significant and important. And maybe some kind of voucher system might work, whereby those parents who were having real difficulty would have a chat with the school, and the school would have a chat with them. And as they were thinking it through and talking it through, those people who were really in difficulty could get a voucher for the food rather than some kind of universal system, so that it would be targeted to the people who really needed it. But the communication between the school and the parent and the home is critical, because you don't want people to feel demeaned by their children being given food at school, but you do want to be able to help those people who really need it. And I think some variation of a voucher system could well help.
Yeah. And actually, in this article, Waitakere College in Auckland did that, where it was a community response. Rather than government funded, the community came in and supported the families that were in need, that were targeted. Go on, Ashley.
It wasn't me, it was Elliot.
Oh, Elliot, go on.
Yeah, so but I just want to also bring out that what the free lunches also did was it took away positive capitalism. We like to throw things at capitalism and say, oh, these corporates are doing dodgy stuff all over by going woke. Well, in actual fact, what happened when we were having our lunches and our breakfasts is that you had Fonterra giving some, you had a Sanitarian giving some, and so you had some of these other companies actually putting in from their own. So they were giving charity, and of course it had to do with a social license and good PR. And I thought that was a great form of PR coming from the corporations. I thought that was an excellent thing. Now that you've got a lot of these state-funded food coming in, now it's removed that idea of the corporations engaging in good, positive PR, and I think that's a sad thing as well.
Okay, Adventures in Believing, which is an interesting name, says I can report from 2 primary schools in Apotiki, huge daily waste of food. And Veronica, I think, is referring to the Waitakere example I gave. That system was happening at our kids' school prior to the free lunches. So it's this kind of universal issue that seems to be the problem rather than targeted to response to those genuinely in need. Right, final quick topic, and that is just the latest polls. Let me just show you what the latest polls show. Basically, Labour seem to have got over the honeymoon of Chris Hipkins, you can see there, and have dropped a little bit, but National is well and truly over the honeymoon of Christopher Luxon, and ACT seem to be doing improving. They actually did a comparison of all the polls over May, and as you can see, it's pretty consistent where National and Labour are level pegging. ACT is quite strong, the Greens, quite a bit of fluctuation around there. You do have to remember that 18% of New Zealanders did not vote at the last election, so there's a big issue there. In terms of the leader, Christopher Luxon is dropping, Chris Hipkins is increasing, but then again, the voters aren't that smart because 8.5% of them still think Jacinda can be leader, and 2.3 think Chloe would make a great Prime Minister. So yeah, that's an interesting result. Let's quickly go around and just a very quick check-up on everybody. Bruce, what do you think? What's your predictions for the election at the moment based on the current polling?
Well, to answer your question, I don't think Luxon is quite dead in the water yet, although he is treading it very vigorously. But I do like and I would like him to be a great deal more confident and assert more clearly what he has been saying about the importance of taxation and the reordering of taxation rates, and saying that with greater clarity. Who's going to... I've got no idea.
Did you like what you saw of Christopher Luxon, the clips that I played from the budget?
I'm getting warmer.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm hoping that it continues.
Okay. Christine, any predictions?
Yeah, I think National and ACT will win the election. I know the polls are showing it the way it is at the moment, and I guess you are surrounded by people who think the way you do. I don't know, but no one that I've heard in months has said, oh, I'm voting Labour. Not one person.
Well, they're obviously out there because they're still going quite...
Who are they? Where are they? They're not anywhere near me.
I'll just read this comment before I come to Ashley. Why isn't Democracy NZ showing in the polls? I thought they were doing well. Like many minor parties, there's lots of noise, but not much votes. Is that correct, Ashley?
Yeah, it is, and I'm with Christine. I don't think it'll be as close as the polls are showing. To be fair, it might be that close right now, but I think it'll tighten up, and there'll be a slightly more robust result for National ACT at the election. But the other implicit question in this, whether it might be time to dump Luxon and put somebody else in, seriously, what a question! It would be the height of insanity to change Luxon right now, this close to an election, not just because it's too close. He's the leader now, we've got to work with him, we've got to get through to the election with him in place. But secondly, who would you replace him with? Because the only two choices that are being talked about would take the party even further to the left. So Luxon's the man, and whether we like him or not, he's the guy that we need to support coming up to the election.
Okay, and I mean, that would be a bit like replacing Winston at New Zealand First, Ashley?
Well, that would be good.
Actually, I just wanted to check on that graph. Is New Zealand First there? Oh, there they are. They're just down the bottom. So they are polling. There we are.
Yeah, just.
Okay, any predictions, Elliot?
I'm curious to see, and I guess I'm just holding out hope, but I think that the freedom community, we said that 30% of people supported the Wellington protests, that suggests that they didn't like the removal of elements of democracy and freedom that the government had done. Although New Zealanders have a bit of a short memory, unfortunately. The problem that I have, of course, is that there is no party in Parliament who defend the unborn, no party who defends the children in schools who from the sexualised education that we have, none. So as a Conservative Christian, I've got no one to actually vote for in Parliament, and I think that's a bit of a struggle, but we'll see what happens. Unfortunately, National just doesn't seem to have testicular fortitude at the moment.
Okay, let's finish with our chief political analyst, Alfred. What's your thoughts?
Oh, look, I think we're in a situation of situational ethics, right? And for a lot of people, it's the lesser of two evils. You'll notice that there's still a consistent trend of the undecided from 33 to 35%. So it's too early to tell, to be honest. But here's the thing I want to encourage people to do. If you look on the website of Ipsos, IPSOS, and what they do, every quarter they do what they call as an issues-based polling. And what they show is that whatever the issue is, then there's a salient messaging about who people think can best solve that issue. So at the moment, it's cost of living. That's number one. It's about 65% of what people think. So guess who's the party that they would think they could do that most? It's National. Why? Because it's to deal with the economy. But then when you go down to the next biggest issue, it's actually housing. And surprise, surprise, beside Kiwi Build, guess who's the party they think they can solve that issue? It's actually Labour. Believe it or not. So what I'm saying to you, this is how emotive it is. So really, you've got to look deeper than just, you've got to scratch a little bit deeper, because people are emotive, and it's going to be the issue that's going to be the most prominent once we get close to the election. If it's cost of living, then National's is in the target seat. But if it's to do with housing or education, believe it or not, guess who they think education, despite all the things that are going wrong, it's Labour, right? Only just, but they're still tipping the hat ahead. So all I would say to people is that actually what will win the election at the end of the day, October the 14th, will be what is the most prominent issue in people's minds, and who is the party that can solve that with a coalition. That's going to be, in my eyes, the prediction of who will win in the day.
Okay, we're out of time. Just a quick question, Ashley. I need to put this to you as our financial guru. Cherie says, who do we owe all this money to? I mean, you know, what was it? What did you say? 96 billion, was it?
96 billion, yeah.
Yeah, so who do we owe? Because it's definitely not me.
Yeah, it's all over the place. Some of it's in bonds, some of it's the government to itself, some of it's to various financial institutions offshore. There's not one particular source. And some of it's historic. It's not all money that's been borrowed recently, although it does get renewed over time as they attempt to get better rates. But yeah, it's all over the place.
Okay, well done. That was Economics 101 lesson. Thank you very much for that, Ashley. Thank you, Elliot, for super subbing. Fantastic run. Alfred, thank you. Bruce, Christine, Ashley, and we will be back next week for our 10th episode. So we're going to be celebrating. So we will catch you next week. Thanks to the panel. Thanks for watching. This is Straight Talk. See you next week at 8 o'clock. Yeah.